up, we have our special guest speaker, Melody Echols with Invest Atlanta, who's going to be talking about some COVID-19 recovery funds that are available to our local businesses. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, Melody, if you are ready to share yours.
Sure. 1 second.
And again, please, everyone, I think you already know this, but if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. But we will be doing short Q&A at the end to make sure you have all the information you need.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. Can you all see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. Well, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me to present. As Katie mentioned, my name is Melody Echols, and I'm the Assistant Director of Invest Atlanta's ARP programming. I'm happy to be here and just share a presentation on what we have planned for our ARP program so that first and foremost, you all are prepared for what to expect. And also, as you're talking with other partners and residents and other small businesses in the community, you can help keep them informed as well of what opportunities to expect. Just so you know, some of this is pretty high level information, so there are still some pieces to this that are being finalized. Some dates and small details may change, but again, just wanted to share with you all our plan and progress before these opportunities launch. And again, as Katie mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just drop them in the chat and I can address them at the end. Perfect. So the American Rescue Plan is a $350 billion federal program. It's focused on COVID relief and response efforts to support economic stabilization for businesses. So the ARP funding that the city of Atlanta received, Invest Atlanta will be programming $24.7 million of that. And we've designed our ARP programs based on what we heard from businesses after the Resurgence Grant program that we managed in 2020 using CARES Act dollars. And what we found is that funding opportunities, technical assistance, and overall resources were really at the core of what our businesses need and want. So Invest Atlanta created 5 different programs that really fall into 2 major buckets: small business and workforce development. The small business programs focus on affordable commercial space, grants, and technical assistance. And for workforce development, we'll focus on training, wraparound services to support that training, and we'll also support regional efforts as well. And I'll just quickly touch on the workforce development programs just so y'all are informed, but I really want to spend the bulk of time going over the grants and technical assistance piece. But the first workforce development program is focused on hiring and creating job training for unemployed and underemployed populations. It's in partnership with WorkSource Atlanta, and the focus is again on supporting underemployed and unemployed individuals, getting them work experience and job training to ultimately give them access to a middle wage job. This program has 2 phases. Phase 1 of the program is in response to the city's need for hiring individuals to support some of their public departments and get them back to pre-COVID staffing levels. And phase 2 is ensuring that we can provide paid training to those individuals and other individuals for additional opportunities for that middle wage job. And the fact that this program will provide paid training is really the crucial piece to this. Unless we can provide paid training, there's so many individuals that just wouldn't be able to take off work, find daycare, sacrifice the time and money to take advantage of that training. So again, the paid aspect of it is huge. And we're also providing wraparound services in addition to the training. So MARTA cards, daycare, whatever support services each individual needs to ensure that they can take advantage of the program. So we've put $3 million into this, and we're contracting both a staffing agency for phase 1 and the job training and wraparound service provider for phase 2. And this program is going to launch in the coming months. And then I do also want to note that each of our programs have their own KPIs that are listed at the bottom. And this is really just to ensure that our programming is in fact making a difference and we're staying focused on our economic mobility goals. Then the second workforce development program is focused on regional partnerships. And the idea is really just to make sure that we're supporting regional efforts to ensure that our individuals are trained and we're upskilling them to make sure that our workforce is competitive regionally. So we've put $1.7 million into this, again, focusing on upskilling our workers, creating paid apprenticeships, mentorships, training, and support services as well. This program's still being built out, but we'll probably issue an RFP for those regional partnerships around April or May. Cool. And then our biggest program in the First the Small Business utilizes $12.5 million of the ARP funds, and it has a couple components. It has a small business component and a creative talents component. The ARP guidelines reference that funds can be used for enhancing outdoor spaces and getting people outside and to take advantage of those socially distanced and responsible spaces. So we're currently working with the Office of Cultural Affairs to support their Elevate Atlanta program, which provides grants up to $20,000 for artistic performances, installations, murals, things of that nature to create those outdoor spaces. The first round of the Elevate Atlanta program has already closed, but we're planning on an additional round in the fall of this year. So if you know anyone that's a local artist, I'd be happy to connect with you or them and introduce them to someone at the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs to learn more about that opportunity. And then the second piece of this program is for small businesses and nonprofits, and we're using ARP funds to open back up the Resurgence Grant Funds. With the CARES Act funds that Invest Atlanta programmed in 2020, nonprofits were not able to apply per Treasury guidelines, but they are eligible with ARP funds. So we're providing up to $40,000 in reimbursable grants to small businesses and nonprofits within the city. We're super close to finalizing the application for the program. And if you're subscribed to Invest Atlanta's newsletter, or if you follow us on social, you'll definitely hear more about the grant application announcement pretty soon. And our goal is to release the grant application in early March. So I do want to take a few minutes to kind of note a few key differences between 2020's round of the Resurgence Grant Fund and this year's round of the Resurgence Grant Fund. First, with the application. With the CARES Act funding that we received, Treasury gave us a super tight timeline in 2020 to program and disperse the funds. This round with ARP, we've had a little bit more time to really think through how to create a smoother application process. And one of the biggest things we learned is that we really have to balance what we are going to need to show for compliance purposes on the back end. So then what do we need to ask our applicants for documentation on the front end? Because at the end of the day, it's federal money and we can expect to get audited one day, and we'll have to show exactly what every penny of funds were used for and what documentation we have on hand to support that. So we just need to make sure that the documentation that we're asking for from our applicants is actually helping us stay compliant. We also noticed that 2/3 of potential applicants dropped out of the application process right at the point where they were asked to provide financial documentation, which we know that can be a heavy lift for some of our smallest businesses. So we really need to ensure that everyone can finish and submit a successful application. So we're easing that process. We aren't requiring any financial documentation. Instead, we've gathered several sources of data to support the fact that small businesses in Atlanta as a whole were negatively impacted by COVID. And we've taken that approach per Treasury guidelines. So applicants do not need to show additional financial documentation to support that fact. We will ask applicants to attest that they were negatively impacted, but they won't have to show profit and loss statements, tax returns, things of that nature. We're also planning to have several information sessions leading up to the launch of the application. And we're also providing technical assistance prior to the application launch to help any applicants gather any materials if they need that help. And I'll talk a little bit more about technical assistance on the next slide. The second piece on this is on eligible applicants. As I mentioned, nonprofits weren't eligible last round. They are this round. Last round, you also had to be in business for at least a year. This year, startups are eligible to apply per Treasury guidelines. So as long as there's the startup has a business license if they're for profit and they're registered on Secretary of State. So for-profits, nonprofits, and startups all eligible to apply. As I mentioned, we're still finalizing the latest of the application, but I can say that if you're a for-profit, you will need to show your 2022 City of Atlanta business license or proof that you've applied and paid for it, as well as your 2022 Secretary of State registration. If you're a nonprofit, you'll need to show a copy of your IRS determination letter, as well as a current 2022 letter of good standing if you don't have a business license. So again, we'll have technical assistance providers available to assist in compiling all that information, navigating the licensing department if needed. But it's good to start thinking about obtaining some of these materials if you do plan to apply. And then on eligible expenses, the biggest update is that payroll is now an eligible expense. Commercial rent is also an eligible expense again. In addition to that, just any expense that was necessary because of COVID is potentially eligible for reimbursement. Eligible expenses are as of March 3rd, 2021. So we're going to give applicants the opportunity to submit their receipts on the front end of applying rather than us asking for them once they've submitted their application on the back end. We're hoping to just decrease the amount of back and forth with the applicants and our reviewers in the review process. And then lastly is on Treasury compliance reporting, specifically around duplication of benefits. And it wasn't really until all the different COVID relief programs started coming out that Treasury realized that they needed to ensure that businesses weren't tapping into all of these funding sources to cover the same expenses. So we've learned that we can definitely anticipate Treasury is going to ask us how we mitigated that risk. And so now we can make sure to ask for the proper documentation on the front end of the application. So what we've done is created a certification form where applicants can disclose all of the COVID relief funding that they received, and then they can provide all the necessary backup documentation to support that. So again, if you're planning to apply for the Resurgence Grant Fund, it's a good idea to start gathering some of this documentation, getting your 2022 business license, updating your annual registration with Secretary of State, gathering any of your other COVID relief funding you may have received, and even start compiling some eligible receipts. So if you have potentially eligible payroll expenses, commercial rent expenses, gathering those proofs of payment, payroll journals will just, so that they're ready at the time of application launch, will just make the review process much smoother for your application. And then the fourth program is on technical assistance. Also has a few components. We're tackling it at a few different angles. First, we're contracting with 10 to 15 different technical assistance providers to support our small businesses at no cost to the business. The plan is for TA providers to be engaged by the end of this month. That way, they will be there to support those small businesses who are applying for our grant program that's expected to launch in March if they need assistance. But they're also available to any small business in the city, whether they need assistance with marketing, if they're seeking out other funding sources outside of Invest Atlanta, if they need help navigating the permitting or licensing department, things of that nature. We're planning on a very wide range of services to be available to small businesses. And then the second piece is that we're having physical hubs throughout the city. We're focusing on the south side so that our businesses have an accessible and physical space to go to if they need help, again, applying for funding, if they need help creating a business plan or just someone to look over their finances, if they want to restructure their finances through COVID, whatever assistance they need. If they want to have that face-to-face interaction with one of our TA providers, they can utilize one of our TA hubs if they want. And then finally, we're launching an online, we're calling it a digital navigator tool, where a business can go in, kind of type in what services they're looking for, what their needs are, and they'll be connected with the right providers and just shown a list of resources that are available. So we're putting $3.3 million into this program. And again, TA providers will be contracted in by the end of the month as the plan, and the online tool will be available in the coming weeks. So the TA program is set to launch prior to the application launch for the grant program. And then the last program is centered around affordable commercial space. One thing we've heard from our businesses, and I'm sure you all know, it's just super expensive to do business in the city and have a space within the city. And with COVID, it just makes it that much harder, especially for our smallest minority businesses. So we're still building out this program and figuring out the financing structure. But essentially, we plan to engage nonprofit partners to help acquire the commercial space. And then we'll utilize some of our ARP dollars to help subsidize rent payments for those tenants for an extended period of time and ultimately provide permanently affordable commercial spaces throughout the city. We're putting $4.2 million into this program, and again, still building it out, but I think we'll plan to issue an RFP in probably March or April for those nonprofit partners. And I know that was a lot of information, a little bit of time, but I wanted to leave some time for questions and discussion. But I've also included my contact information here if you'd like to continue the conversation offline. And I've also included our small business technical assistance program manager, Jeff Morris's contact information. if you have any technical assistance specific questions that you'd like to discuss. But with that, if you have any questions that I can touch on now, please drop them in the chat if you haven't done so already, and I'd be happy to answer them.
We can open the floor. There are no questions in the chat box, but I would love for anyone to feel free to speak up and ask your questions.
So I'm going to jump in. Yes, Melody, that was a chunk of information in a very small amount of time. I would love to get some time with you offline and talk a little bit more. I do a lot of community and volunteer work with nonprofits and startups, particularly in the minority space in Metro Atlanta, and my brain is racing with getting some of those folks connected to you, and so I'd like to get a little bit more information. Can you just very briefly touch on some of the, besides the technical piece, just some of the nonprofits, or I recall the artists, you mentioned that, but are there sort of some areas of focus in terms of nonprofits or for-profits, for that reason, that you all target, or is it just sort of meeting certain criteria and letting that really be the guide?
Yeah, it's really meeting certain criteria. If the nonprofit obviously has to be within the city of Atlanta, we're restricted by city of Atlanta boundaries. They have their IRS determination letter, they're in good standing with the city, and can, provides some like save affidavit W-9, that, typical documentation. And then, as far as the application goes, it's the same for nonprofits and for-profits. We'll ask them to kind of plead their case on how they were impacted by COVID, what they're going to plan to use these funds for. Eligible expenses are the same for for-profits and nonprofits. Anything COVID related, PPE, if they've had to, kind of expand or restructure their space to adhere to social distancing, that sort of stuff, payroll, commercial rent, all of that is eligible. Each application will be scored based on some certain criteria. There's a list of qualified census tracts that are defined in the Treasury final rule. So if they're located in one of those census tracts, they'll get priority. We are giving priority to businesses that have not received any COVID relief funding in the past. We are giving, if they're certified minority, women-owned business, things like that. We have certain things that we're scoring on, and we're the goal, because we know this is going to be super competitive. We got hundreds and thousands of applications last year, and we have, or in 2020, and we have even less funds this round, and it's open up to a broader range of businesses. So I'm expecting the process to be very competitive. So we're going to create a pretty robust scoring process for that.
Thank you. And kudos to putting some emphasis on the commercial space and helping with that kind of funding, because I think that is often a critical, even pre-COVID, even since COVID, right?
Absolutely.
Of trying to find a place to actually set up, start up, and build. So thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. I'll be in touch with you.
Awesome.
Any other questions? That was a great question. Thank you, Andre. So Melody, can home-based businesses apply for any of the grants?
Yes, home-based businesses can apply. They, again, still will have to be within the city of Atlanta, still will have to have their business license that essentially tells us they are, registered to work out of their business or out of their home. The only thing is that home-based businesses cannot submit rent for reimbursement. Obviously, this has to be rent for a commercial space. We're not reimbursing for residential rent payments.
Good point. And I was actually surprised to learn the criteria around small businesses. What is a small business to Invest Atlanta?
Yeah, so we are defining a small business based on employee size. So businesses will have to show that they have less than 250 employees as of December 31st, 2021. We went by SBA standards on that, but SBA standards kind of range industry to industry, and it could be anywhere from 250 employees up to 1,500 employees. So we decided to kind of geared to the smallest of small businesses, capping that at 250 employees.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? I know it was a lot of information.
And I am happy to meet with any of you guys offline. And again, make sure you're following us on social or subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to have several of these webinars that really dive into the documentation and the application process and just in more detail, and could answer more specific and nuanced questions in those as well.
And are there any application fees to any of these programs?
No application fees. It's all online. It'll be easily accessible through investatlanta.com. I'm sure it'll be blasted everywhere on the website, but it's an online application. We used it in the 2020 round, and it's a great platform. It's user friendly, so hoping to make that a smooth process.